Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to come from Exodus chapter 10, beginning in verse 21. Today we will look at the ninth plague and the rhythm of the plagues with Moses' proclamation and then Pharaoh's response, mostly hardening his own heart. And then we've seen a couple instances here in the text of God hardening Pharaoh's heart. That rhythm is about to change because this is the penultimate plague. It's going to be a bad one, but it's going to get way worse. The final plague, the 10th plague, is absolutely far and away the worst. I just want to give a brief anecdote before I go into the text, just to provide context and address a critique of this text, oddly enough. When we lived in Nashville, we were just 12 miles from the heart of Nashville. My office was on Broadway in downtown Nashville. And we lived in a neighborhood suburb of Nashville called Mount Juliet. And so naturally, it took me an hour and a half to get to and from work because of traffic. And in 2017, there was an eclipse that was similar to the one that just happened last week. By the way, if you were one of those believers who was spreading a false prophecy that was the day that Jesus would come back, please post an apology and the words of Jesus in Matthew 24, that no man knows the time or the hour. Nobody from the Redemption Church proclaimed to know the time or the hour that Jesus was coming back. Please join a church that teaches the whole counsel of God. Anyway, this happened in 2017, and people were camping out all over the streets around Mount Juliet. There were RVs lining the streets into our neighborhood. And so my sister and her family came up and joined us. We set out the kiddie pool and the tent over the grill and just had this big bucket of sodas, and we just waited for the eclipse to happen. And when it did, it was incredible. It was really beautiful. It reminded my bride and I of actually the eye of a hurricane. Don't be overly concerned when hurricanes hit Florida, because if it's a category 3 or lower, then Floridians have what's called hurricane parties. Category 4 or 5, get out of town. But there's actually some pretty good surf to be had as it makes landfall and then the days after. During the eye of a hurricane, you see this omnidirectional yellowish hue to the horizon. It's like a sunset on all the horizon in every direction simultaneously. And that's kind of what it looked like, only it was much darker during this full solar eclipse. We had eye protection, of course. And something happened that I've never seen before. There were these squiggly lines all over the asphalt and the sidewalk and almost visible on the grass. It was cool, but it came and it went. It didn't take long for the full umbra to give way. And then the sun was shining again and the animals calmed down. So that could not have been the plague of darkness, nor could it have been a sandstorm. I think they're called kashmeen. These are common in desert places like Egypt. That's been posited as a natural explanation for this plague of darkness. But I'll show you in the text why that's not the case. This is not just the absence of light. Here's Exodus 10:21. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward heaven, and there will be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be felt." Okay, that's your first hint that this is not your average darkness. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt for 3 days. Not a solar eclipse. One person could not see another. And for 3 days, they did not move from where they were. Yet all the Israelites had light where they lived. Now, the 3 days thing is interesting. For one thing, it disproves that it was a solar eclipse, but also I think it, in a slight way, it also kind of foreshadows the darkness that fell upon the followers of Jesus as they did not heed his prophecies about his death and his resurrection, that the darkness would fall and then 3 days later there would be light. All right. But here's where the disproof of the sandstorm theory comes. Yet all the Israelites had light where they lived. Okay. And we'll come back and we'll talk about what I believe is the reasoning for this. Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go worship the Lord. Even your families may go with you. Only your flocks and herds must stay behind." All right. Pharaoh's a master manipulator. He's given these quasi-confessions, and now he's semi-acquiesced, but he's being manipulative because if they leave their flocks and herds, they have to come back. Don't try to negotiate with the wrath of God on your sin. Don't try to make deals with God. You're in no position to bargain. You have nothing to offer him. He's the omnipotent. Moses responded, you must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings to prepare for the Lord our God. Even our livestock must go with us. Look how uncompromising Moses is. Not a hoof will be left behind, because we will take some of them to worship the Lord our God. We will not know what we will use to worship the Lord until we get there. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was unwilling to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, leave me. Make sure you never see my face again, for on the day you see my face, you will die. Look at how he's escalated now. As the Lord has hardened his heart, and has he and his people and his magicians and his false gods have all gotten their tails kicked 9 times, he's making death threats. He's trying to manipulate, and he's making death threats. As you have said, Moses replied, I will never see your face again. Now, when we get to chapter 12, Moses, in fact, will see Pharaoh's face again. So what's the deal? Because after the 10th plague, Moses will go before Pharaoh, and he will receive Pharaoh's formal confession and conceding to allow the Israelites to go. So why does Pharaoh say, leave me, make sure you never see my face again, for on the day you see my face, you will die. And then Moses said, as you have said, I will never see your face again. This see my face portion, the day you see my face, you will die. The Hebrew could connotate more of a formal meeting, as in, this is the last time you and I are formally going to meet. If you try to have another formal meeting with me, I'll have you put to death. It's possible that that's what Pharaoh's actually saying. But there's something else too. When Moses does see Pharaoh's face again, it will be after the deaths of the firstborn. And so you can imagine that Pharaoh's face is not going to be quite the same again. I took this photo while I was waiting in line to ride The Mummy with my family at Universal Studios. This is Horus, also known as Ra, spelled R-A. And he is the Egyptian lowercase g god of the sun. And he has been proven utterly impotent by this plague of darkness. But there's even more to it than just utterly eviscerating the Egyptian pantheon. There's also a foreshadowing of the nature of heaven versus the nature of hell. One person could not see another. In 3 days, they did not move from where they were. Yet all the Israelites had light where they lived. In Revelation, we see this beautiful prophecy about how we will no longer have need for the sun, because the direct presence of God himself will give us light. And so those who are glorified, those who are in Christ, those who are in heaven forevermore, will bask in the beautiful and glorious light of God. And then those who are not in Christ will not have light where they live. God is demonstrating once again his absolute omnipotence. And it's on a scale that goes beyond the land of Egypt. It's even beyond the sphere of the earth. It's in the heavens above and the whole universe as under the sovereignty of God. So look at how the scale of the plagues has risen. Look at how far we've come from gnats and frogs. In all of this, God has demonstrated his power in a way that escalates, and it has done exactly what it was intended to do. I even gave God glory for the plagues while I was waiting in line to ride The Mummy. I gave God glory every time I saw Heket or Ra. Every time I saw an Egyptian god, I was like, yeah, that's the one who was proven impotent in this plague, and that's the one that was proven impotent in that plague. God has set out to do this, and he has done it. And so we see once again this microcosm of how eternity will be, that those who are away from the presence of God will be cast out into utter darkness, and there's gnashing of teeth. And then those who are in Christ will dwell in the direct light of God forevermore. Give God glory for the plagues. Give God glory for his long suffering with Pharaoh. Give God glory for his sovereignty over Pharaoh's heart. Give God glory. Make his name great, because that was his intended purpose in the plagues.